A lack of respect is a really big red flag. And maybe you think that you're okay, but you notice a disrespect towards other people, not just a flippant, I'm sorry, and then no change, right? But actually truly change those patterns of communication to be healthy instead of toxic. So that yellow flag can go either way, depending on what the perpetrator chooses. Do they choose to be healthy? Do they choose to be toxic? But we talked about disrespect. So a respectful relationship would be a green flag, right? A person who treats you with respect, who treats the wait staff at the restaurant with respect.
Welcome to the Just Separated podcast. Hi, I'm Karen Oman, a thanatologist, grief counselor, divorce strategist, and co-author of the Just Separated workbook. I draw on years of personal and professional experience to guide you through the challenges of your divorce. Together, with our expert guests, we'll equip you with the clarity, resilience, and tools to take charge and move forward with confidence. Follow Just Separated and join us as we explore the many different facets of divorce. Hello, welcome to the Just Separated podcast. I'm Karen Oman, your host and co-founder of the Divorce Workshop. Today we're going to talk about recognizing relationship flags, the red, the yellow, and the greens with Rev G. Our guest today is Geneece, a survivor of more than 2 decades of abuse who has turned that pain into a passion for helping other survivors. She has taught numerous workshops on domestic violence, serves on the board of directors for the local violence shelter, has testified before the state legislative on bills that affect victims and survivors, and is currently serving on the public policy committee for the state's domestic violence organization. She has a desire to continue to advocate for other survivors. Thank you for coming on today, Reverend G.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here with you.
So this is such an important conversation because recognizing the red and the yellow flags, as well as the greens, can mean the difference between having a healthy relationship, which we all want, or one that can lead to various forms of domestic violence.
Yeah, absolutely. Those red flags might be something that our intuition would tell us, hey, something's wrong, something's not quite right. Maybe it's that gut feeling that people get. But I think particularly as women, we are taught to ignore those red flags. They might come up in a relationship, but we're told, like, stalking. That's a good example, right? Stalking is maybe a romantic gesture instead of something that's used to control you in a very real way. Love bombing, right? Particularly when we're in the month of February and we're talking about Valentine's Day. Flowers, gifts, expressions of love that might not be true, right? Because maybe it's too fast or too strong in the relationship. A lot of people get into very serious relationships very quickly because of love bombing, thinking that everything is great and they found their soulmate. But when time goes on, they realize that the person is not who they made themselves out to be at the beginning. My first ex was very much this way. He was a great love bomber, appeared to be a very romantic individual, and the relationship went quickly, and I got married right out of high school, only to realize that I was in a very abusive marriage. And the love bombing disappears. Like, once they have you hooked, once they have you trapped, the love bombing isn't there anymore, just the abuse. So red flags are those things that indicate a serious problem in the relationship. Maybe emotional harm, maybe physical harm, maybe spiritual harm, maybe financial harm.
Yeah, I was about to say, when you mentioned gut, so I didn't know anything about red flag. The only red flag, Reverend G, I knew is if he hit me.
Mm-hmm. Same.
I didn't know all the other course of control, the financial abuse, the sexual abuse, whatever, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse. I just knew if he hit me, I'm not going to tolerate that. Right? That was it. And my gut, and what I want to point out is when you said your gut, and I knew my gut was saying something, but I didn't listen to my gut which was telling me this is not a good relationship, Karen. So I think that's why we didn't have the podcasts, the books, the knowledge that we have now back then,
Absolutely.
correct?
Yeah, I wish I had this knowledge. I wish somebody had shared about healthy and toxic relationships somewhere in my junior high or high school years, those years before you end up married, someone to say, this is not healthy, but this is healthy. And these are the kind of that continuum or the nuances between them. If someone had sat down with me, or if that had been taught in school, or that had been part of the youth group at church, I would not have ended up in the domestic violence relationship that I did right out of high school. I just, I feel so bad because so many people say the same thing. Like they wish they had had this information when they were younger, and that's why I talk about it today.
Yeah, because as it is a preventative, if we can help, and I also want to make mention that it does affect both genders. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's different, but it does affect them both, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um, we have to be mindful of that as well.
Absolutely.
So we talked about the red, and those are the more, like, I would say, more obvious. Would you say?
Yeah, so red flags, let me just read a few things that come off the list. Isolation, like not letting you be part of your friend group anymore, keeping you from your family, maybe moving you to a new location where you don't have connections. A lack of respect is a really big red flag. And maybe you think that you're okay, but you notice a disrespect towards other people. That should be a red flag. Being really possessive or high pressure in the relationship is a red flag. We've already talked about the love bombing and the stalking, a history of violence, a love for weaponry, combined with that history of violence that could spill out, like maybe not just a problem with other people, but eventually that comes back on you as well. And then like constant criticism. That's just so toxic to live with. Somebody who plays the victim. How about that one? Right? Because there's always something wrong. They're always disadvantaged. They want your pity, they want your empathy. And if you are an empathic person, if you're the kind of person who loves to rush in and take care of another person, you fall for that. And that's really dangerous. Financial control. This is somebody who loves to control all finances, including yours, right? They want your paycheck. They don't want you to work, right? They want you to drop out of college. So there's no chance for educational advancement. Demanding loyalty. You have to be absolutely loyal to them 100%, even when the situation probably doesn't warrant it. So, those are some examples of red flags.
Yeah, there's a lot there that if you didn't read them out, and I'm nodding my head as you're reading them, going, yes, yes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're obvious, but they're still not obvious,
Right,
like
right.
I remember one time with my ex, how he would say things to other people about me,
Yes.
right? Right. And that was very disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
And right. And they would make it as a joke. Right. And I remember
Yep.
going, oh, that's really hurtful, but I didn't do anything. I just continued dating. Right. So that's why I said we back to that. I didn't know what I was involved in, but
Right. Same.
the other ones that are the one that's really, really interesting are the yellow flags, because if we're having a hard time even figuring out the red ones sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
the yellow ones could probably make us even more indecisive, right? Or more confused, because as you said, like those rom-coms are like, oh, romantic, and they're, and a lot of women fall into those, right? So the yellow flags, are they even more challenging?
I would say yes, because they're the things that might be okay depending on the person. They're a little more questionable. There's a lot more nuance with a yellow flag. Let's talk about like a poor communication. Maybe the person just grew up in a home where really healthy communication was not normalized. With therapy, with an ability and a desire to change those unhealthy patterns of communication, that yellow flag can turn green. That those patterns of behavior can improve. It is not so deeply embedded that if a person desires to change, that they can't change that. But it also can go the other way. And this is why I call them yellow flags, and that can go green or it can go red. If that poor communication continues and the person is not willing to hear their partner say, that was disrespectful, and maybe do some introspection like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I disrespected you. I'm so sorry. I will do better, and actually does better. Not just a flippant, I'm sorry, and then no change, right? But actually truly change those patterns of communication to be healthy instead of toxic. So that yellow flag can go either way, depending on what the perpetrator chooses. Do they choose to be healthy? Do they choose to be toxic? Another one would be jealousy. And you mentioned the rom coms. Jealousy, like stalking, is normally portrayed as cute, as desirable, as sweet. The person loves you, they're jealous. But a lot of times that jealousy gets really toxic really fast because they start to be very possessive. They start to control your whereabouts. They need to know where you are. It's combined with stalking. And all of a sudden, that jealousy is not so cute.
Do you think, just to interrupt here, do you think that the rom-coms and all the books, the romantic books, do you think that's kind of fed into us thinking that jealousy and this stalking is really romantic gesture?
I think so. Media is such a powerful tool, and when we see that, when we're constantly bombarded by those images, it just makes us think it's normal when it's not.
Yeah, so it is. It's confusing, right? Because I was one of those kids that read those little romantic, as a teenager and young adult, and I thought, oh, that's so romantic. But really, what you're saying is we should just be mindful that is not really. I guess it depends on the spectrum, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And again, jealousy can be pointed out as like, hey, I'm not really comfortable with this attitude or this behavior. And if the person changes and says, hey, I respect you, I value you as an individual, and I won't do that
Mm-hmm.
anymore, that makes a difference. And those yellow flags are all about the attitude and behavior that that's kind of tied together, and whether or not the person's willing to change when they're confronted with a boundary.
So that could be a tip as well. So you could, if you're dating somebody right now
Mm-hmm.
or in a relationship, and you talk to them about it, and if they're willing to kind of work on that rather than project or
Correct.
blame, right? Then you could work with people, because communication is a tough thing to handle. Like we all have to work on communication skills, correct? So
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Um,
Is there
when
any
someone,
other? Sorry.
I was just gonna, yeah, just
Mm-hmm,
one more. I was gonna say, like,
mm-hmm.
inflexibility, um, not being able to kind of roll with whatever the situation is in front of you, like being very rigid. That could be a rigid gender role. It could be a rigid thought process about, how to go about your day or what your weekend is going to look like, or anything that just doesn't allow that that flexibility in your day and in your relationship can also be a yellow flag. Anyone should be able to point out and feel 100% safe to do so. I'm not comfortable here. Can we talk about this? Can we find out how we can work together as a couple to change this particular situation where I'm not comfortable?
So would that be like having being able to set boundaries?
Yes. Boundaries is a huge part of yellow flags. And when a person is not willing to acknowledge or abide by a boundary, I think those yellow flags go red really fast.
Hmm. Yeah, I think my boundaries were so porous,
Mine too.
right? And
I've
and
learned a
that's
lot.
yeah, I think that's one of the things that we're trying to advocate is for our children too, or for anyone, is for everybody, even us who are out of a relationship, to have the boundaries, to learn to have boundaries, and it's healthy to have them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked about red and we've talked about yellow. So let's talk about some of those green flags that you really want to attract, right? Like those are the ones that um, are healthy relationships.
Yeah. So green flags are almost the opposite of red. There's not an exact opposite in every case, but we talked about disrespect. So a respectful relationship would be a green flag, right? A person who treats you with respect, who treats the wait staff at the restaurant with respect, who treats the family with respect, right? And we're not saying that you have to like fawn over someone who has maybe been toxic to the person. So maybe the person grew up in an unhealthy home. We're not saying that you have to be um, like catering to people who were unhealthy to you. We're saying that you don't go around making a really hard time for everybody, right? Because you're just going to engage with respectful conversation, even when it's not warranted, right? Because that shows that you're the better person, that you're taking the higher road.
Can I
Um,
just point out there that
yeah,
also, could you watch out for emotional regulation,
yeah, for sure.
right? How they handle crises or stress. And
Yes,
yeah.
yes. That is a really good indication of whether someone fits in that red, yellow, or green flag territory is how they handle crisis, right? If there's some road rage going on as you're driving down the interstate to dinner or a movie, how does the person respond, right? If there's a if somebody gets hurt, falls in front of you, how does the person respond? If the person is disrespected by an office mate, how do they respond? So yeah, absolutely. Emotional regulation is huge.
Yeah. And I want to point out, like, crises are really tough. So it's not like you can't have any reaction, right? It's
Uh-huh.
just
Mhm.
having healthier ones where they're not berating you or taking it out on others or
Mhm.
feeling that you walking on eggshells because of their behavior or energy in the house.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. If a person ever feels they're walking on eggshells, that's definitely yellow and probably red.
It was red for me.
Yeah.
Definitely red,
Yeah.
right? So,
Uh-huh. So we talked about a history of violence. A green flag would be known for kindness, right? Being that person who goes the extra mile for the people around them. Um, Instead of creating fear in the relationship, which would be a very red flag, how about the person creating like authentic peace in the relationship? You feel safe. You should always, every person has the right to feel safe in their relationship. Safety is a green flag. Absolutely.
can
A
I just
person who affirms you. Yeah.
oh,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry. I just had a moment there where I thought, how about taking
Yeah.
responsibility?
Yep. 100%. That is one of the things that really stood out to me about my now partner. He took responsibility. If I said I was uncomfortable with something, he immediately was introspective and took responsibility and said, I didn't realize that it affected you that way. And it was a learning curve for him to get into a relationship with somebody who had been a victim of domestic violence for 25 years, but he rolled with it and he was willing to learn. That's a green flag. Willing to learn. He was trustworthy. I felt safe. I never had to worry about bringing something up with him because I knew he would stop and think and reflect.
Hmm.
He's
Yeah.
always fair, fairness, right? Um, there's a lot of green flags that can just they warm your heart. They make you feel like this is a safe and comfortable place for me. I'm not going to be at risk here.
I am going to ask you though. So, people who have been through abuse of all various forms of domestic violence, to find a new partner, um, like you and I did, and I'm
Hmm.
also very in a very safe and loving relationship now. Um, is it more challenging because of what we went through?
I would say yes, because because you've heard my story before. But to just acquaint the listeners, I've had not one but two abusive marriages. The first one was very short lived, right out of high school. The second one was much longer. It lasted more than 2 decades. And I think being unaware of those red and yellow flags that we're talking about today, only understanding that physical assault was part of domestic violence, not all the other forms that you mentioned at the beginning, that kept me stuck in that second abusive relationship for so long. I didn't know about the verbal and emotional and financial and sexual and spiritual abuse that went into that. And I had some blame and shame, both internal and external, coming from that second marriage. Him saying, well, of course it's all your fault, right? And just not being able to understand because I didn't have any awareness or education in my life until the very end of that marriage. And as soon as I got the awareness, when I saw red flag lists, I was like, oh my gosh, all of these apply to my relationship. This is awful. So when I started dating my now partner, I had multiple red flag lists and I vetted him 1,000 ways. And he was patient while I did so. And I think that that is a real difference because we have a lot of baggage as survivors of domestic violence to carry into a new relationship. And the person that we are getting into a relationship with, if they're genuine, if they're real, if they're trustworthy, they're going to give us the space, the time, and the grace to work through some of what we're bringing in, handle it, and still show us that they're a safe person.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to have this conversation, because it's not just for the youth and the people dating, it's also for people that have been through it,
Yes.
that they can read your book or listen to this podcast and go, okay, I'm not going to let this cycle happen again, because the cycle,
Yes.
it's repeated, right? I'm going to be honest. When I was in therapy, going through my divorce and after, and I remember saying to therapists, I said, I don't want to be a magnet to attract another one of
Right.
these, right? Because being that empathetic and people pleaser type of personality, it's like I was a magnet. So, and we had to work on that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't realize between the two marriages what was wrong, what I was vulnerable to. And I did go to therapy for a short time, but that therapist never talked about domestic violence or red flags or relationships. So I did not get any new material that would have helped me to keep me out of a second abusive marriage. And then that person just wanted one of those instantaneous relationships like, hey, we're soulmates, let's get married next month kind of thing. And so about 4 months into dating, we were already married. And that's
Oh,
just way, 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 way too fast. That a hasty relationship is a red flag.
I think, does research say, or that's like you should be with someone a full year or so, or is
I
that?
don't know if I've seen numbers, but I would say yes to that. Because you cannot ascertain someone's true personality in just a couple of months. You need a history with them. You need some time to explore how they react to crisis, as you mentioned, how they interact with their family or their coworkers, how they treat older people, how they treat younger people. What are their friends like? What do they do in their spare time? You just don't get a clear enough picture in a couple of months to really know the truth about somebody.
Yeah, that was the mistake I made, right?
Mhm.
I, like
Me
you,
too.
it was 6 months, then we broke up, and then another 7 months, and we broke up, and um, I never knew the family. That's another thing I want to point out. Get to know the family, get to know how they behave with their family and their friends, and how they. I mean, we talked about this before, but um, just more signs. Just keep an eye on it. Get the whole picture, right, before you get married. So you
Yeah.
have a. Before I ask the last question, you have this great book called Never Ever After: How Recognizing Red Flags in Relationship Can Save You a Whole Lot of Grief. I love it.
Yes. It is available as a paperback or Kindle on Amazon. And it's just a short book. And I'm not trying to tell anyone what to do. I'm not curing anybody's relationship. I'm trying to give them the tools to look at all their relationships, whether it's personal, professional, family. We need all of our relationships to be healthy. Most people tend to think of romantic relationships, and indeed, that's what I thought when I wrote it. But I do think this is a tool to look at all the relationships in our lives to make sure they're all healthy. And I hope that people can be empowered to make the right decisions that are best for them.
Yeah, we talked a lot about romantic relationships today, but honestly, you can, as you said, you can talk about this as friends.
Mm-hmm.
I have a daughter that just had to finally, after years, break up a girlfriend relationship because it was just patterns of abuse, right? That happens, right?
Yes,
Or
it does.
and that's girlfriend to girlfriend and parents or workers, the boss, right?
Yep.
Right, dealing with toxic people. So being aware, as this book's going to tell them the signs, and because you have a checklist, correct? Right, you have
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a list that kind of puts red, yellow, and green
Hmm.
on the same page, and you can kind of just quickly look like, where are my relationships? And then the pages will talk about kind of juxtapose the red against the green at the first portion of the book. And then in the second portion of the book, kind of explore those yellow flags a little more in depth.
Yeah, it's a great book. So I ask everyone this question before we wrap up. For someone who is just separated, whether they left or were left, what advice would you give them to help them navigate that overwhelming early days?
That is such a great question. I think looking at red flag lists helps because sometimes we need clarity about what we've come out of. And looking at a red flag is kind of a definitive way of saying, oh, that was, more toxic than I thought it was. Or looking at a yellow flag list and saying, I realize there's more on this list than I thought I was dealing with in the relationship. Because when we're so close, when we're in the middle of it, it is really hard to parse out the healthy from the unhealthy, from the toxic. We dismiss, we minimize, and then, of course, the toxic person is doing that to us too, right? Oh, it really wasn't that bad. Do you really think I meant it in that way? I was just joking, right? So, to be able to get some clarity, step away, don't rush back. If the person's telling you, I'm sorry, I want to try this relationship again, don't rush back into that relationship. A person needs lots and lots of time to see if changes are real.
Yeah, great advice there. I wish I had that years ago.
Me too. Me too,
Right?
100%.
Yeah. So it was great having you on. If you want to give your webpage, and I know you have another book as well. Um, any future things coming up, or how to get in touch with you?
Yeah. My website is hoperisethrive.com. Same Hope Rise Thrive on social media. My other book is for faith leaders who want to engage with improving responses to domestic violence, and that's called Taking It Seriously. And um,
You have a podcast as well, right?
the podcast is Rise Again with Reverend Jen. And my first season is all about resilience after abuse, looking at how survivors have navigated that post-abuse life to find their resilience and continue to heal and recover after abuse. I do a lot of domestic violence research, and that's what I will continue to do over the next few years. I just recently finished a study and I'm digging into the data analysis right now. So that will be the next project on my horizon.
Well, we'd love to have you back on, of course. You are
Great.
full of such great, important information. We
Always a
need,
pleasure to speak with you.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
Thank you for joining today's discussion with our divorce expert. Check out the show notes for more about our guest. If you're finding value in our podcast, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and our YouTube channel at Divorce Workshop. Share your questions, comments, or guest suggestions. We'd love to hear from you. For a comprehensive divorce guide, check out our Just Separated workbook on Amazon worldwide. This workbook covers everything from emotions and co-parenting to finances, legal insights, and recovery, a must-have for anyone navigating separation or divorce.